discussion? I guess before we begin, congratulations. Good evening and welcome. This is the fourth meeting of the Newmarket Water Rights Subcommittee. We'll begin at 7:01 with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, as this is our fourth and most likely final meeting, both sides regarding the RBO issue have had the opportunity to speak. We've reserved tonight's time to finish the business of this subcommittee as well as have our discussion and our final recommendation. With that in mind, we'll move into item 2 on our agenda, August 15th public minutes. Anything from the counselors? Did they look good? I thought they looked good.
I thought that they were very detailed, and that's not a negative. And both the minutes, these minutes and the ones that Gretchen did, just thank you guys, both of you, for your work on that.
I didn't realize how hard it was to be.
So I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. We'll move on to August 24th minutes. Again, same comments. I didn't see anything that was out of place or.
I think I may have. I'm not sure how to say her name. Rachel Lawrence's name incorrectly.
Yes. I will.
So.
Assuming no objection, I will modify the S, spell it correctly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Her first name too. I'm not sure. You had an A in your minutes.
Oh.
I will confirm, but as far as I'm aware, it's spelled correctly.
Yeah, it's nice to get people's names spelled right.
Alrighty.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from October 24th.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sorry, I realize we typically call name by name.
No, I wouldn't have to do that, I think.
Wonderful. Alrighty, good. Alrighty, that looks good. So, on to the RBO discussion then. How do we stand? I guess at this point I'm entertaining just regular polite discussion between us. No need for no necessity for formalities in terms of how we do this. Does anybody have any immediate comments for?
Did anyone have prepared things they wanted to read, or?
I had some minor things that I wanted to say, but it was nothing. I don't have a book here.
Me neither.
All right. You okay? Fine.
How do we
Yeah.
want it?
Sure.
Dive in.
Yeah. So I guess prior to voting tonight, I would like to say that I was very, very pleased to see the reaction and outpouring to having the subcommittee. What was kind of a one-off issue that came to the town council so many months ago, which, Gretchen really took a passion to and brought this subcommittee forward so we could be here tonight and really hear out the arguments, in favor of having a rights-based ordinance adopted in Newmarket. I wish that we had that level of passion about every matter in this town, because I think it really says something about the people that we have in Newmarket who are willing to come forward and, really argue in favor for what they believe in. So that, to me, regardless of where anything lands, I was really amazed in I know we have somewhat of a smaller showing tonight, but when Attorney Radigan was here and during Monica and Michelle's presentation, we had a ton of people that came out just to hear what had to be said. So I really like to thank the individuals who helped contribute to that. All in all, though, in terms of the RBO, I think at this point I'm not necessarily convinced. It was a hard process for me to kind of get to this decision for me personally. I really was I was encouraged by what was brought to us. I think that for me personally, there are still just a ridiculous number of legal hurdles that shouldn't be there, but unfortunately are there through, the state of New Hampshire and, what we're able to do. But still impressed, nonetheless, with what was brought to us. But that's all I had to say. So thank you.
Want to go down the line, or how do you want to go ahead?
I can jump in.
Sure.
So, I don't like to read from notes, but I didn't want to lose some of the thoughts that I had, because I have thought about this a really long time since the process started.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to do due diligence to meet with people and talk to people outside of these meetings as well, where I could arrange that. So, for example, through the process, I think it started when I went to the CELDEF presentation, or was it CELDEF, or was it just the Newmarket organization at the library?
It was Answer in partnership with
Okay.
and supported with
Yeah.
legalese drafting from Zelda.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that was inspired by Councillor Weinstein bringing the group's, awareness of the group and the meetings going on at the Stone Church at that time, I think, and the presentations, and the kind of level of, like you were saying, Councillor Dumont, the level of interest in this topic by the community. So I took time to go, see the presentation myself. I was only able to go to one, but that was really helpful as an introduction to the whole topic and kind of the philosophy behind it as well, which I think has probably been the most challenging part of this for me, is to kind of remain open to a different way of thinking about how things should be ordered and how to approach, how citizens can think about approaching challenges to health and welfare and dangers to the environment and protecting them and acting on those perceived dangers. So I found it really inspiring, to see that people are still trying to be innovative and think of different ways that they can get things done faster and bypass bottlenecks. And that appeals to me fundamentally as well, as kind of a lifelong progressive. I believe in change. I believe that change is generally good when you have people who are acting in good faith, and I've seen it really result in good outcomes. Now, I will say that on the opposite side, for me, my other lifelong experience at work, which is very formative for me, is working on projects, very large projects within companies to affect and make change happen. What makes that happen is an adherence to process. When you don't adhere to process, that's when things really go wrong. You aren't successful, and you can have bad unintended consequences as well. So those are kind of the two sides of, where I'm coming from and the history that's formed my perspective on this. So I wanted to give that context for some of my comments as well. I'm definitely right down the middle on that. I gotta tell you, I've been gone back and forth as I listen to different people with different perspectives. And I think that maybe shows that I've tried to remain open, hear what people are saying, that I'm become kind of convinced by what they're saying, and it means I'm hearing what they're saying too, right? Then I hear the next person, I go the other way. And I think probably like the two of you have gone back and looked, reviewed the videos, did the minutes, got right back into the weeds there and the details. I don't want to go on too long. I just want to kind of to level set kind of my perspective on and the experience for me so far. I think I'll just mention a couple other things I did. I did meet with Ellen Reed, who had been one of the co-sponsors of the constitutional amendment for the state. That was, I'll just say for the record, it was CACR 19. And what that was meant to do was allow towns to enact local laws to protect health, safety, and welfare. So very much aligned, and I think was trying to, open the door for the RBOs to be formalized. It'd be a formal way that municipalities could enact these kind of regulations. Oops, my computer just, all right. So that was very helpful. I wanted to get her perspective because, of course, that amendment was not approved or ratified. Not sure what the right term is. Didn't move forward this year. Also, Charlotte De Lorenzo was another, two of our representatives helped sponsor that bill. So I thought that was very interesting for Newmarket as well. My takeaway from meeting with her basically was, I wanted to get her take. My main question for her was, is it better to try and get the constitutional amendment and lay the groundwork and provide a way for municipalities to, basically do it legally, right? Which is, I think, been one of our main concerns, right? Or reasons that we're thinking, like, how can we do this? Or, she was like, well, it doesn't, I think what she told me was it really doesn't matter, like either one, because really the bottom line is to get more control at the local level. And if it takes kind of tipping the cart over a little bit by municipalities just going forward with RBOs, and then that opens the door to get the constitutional amendment done, great. Or if the constitutional amendment gets there first, and then that opens the door the other way. Either way, you're getting where and I thought about it, and I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I agree with where this is going, as far as and even Mr. Radigan, the town attorney, he opined, he gave his personal opinion that he thought that municipalities should have more control. It would be great in many cases if they did. And I'm like, well, that's a lot of food for thought. There's a lot of maybe sentiment behind that, But that's for municipal control, right? And the RBO itself is kind of something apart from that. It has its own goals, right, and ways of doing it. So it basically came down to two key aspects for me, which I think were pretty clearly articulated for us by the town attorney, but also in earlier meetings, which is basically authority, whether we have the authority to pass and enforce an ordinance, and the specificity of the ordinance. Okay? So I think where I am right now is I remain open to kind of going forward with, even if we don't have official authority, I can talk more about my reasoning behind that. I remain open to the idea of an RBO, despite that challenge. I think on the flip side, though, regarding the specificity, I think it would be beneficial to pay attention to those suggestions and that advice on how to make the RBO better. So maybe as it's been presented to us, or the way it stands now, would maybe be subject to maybe some improvements or rewriting it, or addressing that specificity concern. So that's where I am at the moment.
I have a few thoughts. Do you want to, are you done?
I may chime in. I wanted to just
Have a conversation.
Stay there, yeah, for now.
Well, a few things. I want to echo Councillor Dumont's thoughts when you opened about the level of engagement from the community has been really great, and I agree. I wish that that was the case on every issue. Unfortunately, it's not. But I think that it is a testament to the fact that this is obviously a really important issue for many people who live in our community. Obviously, I say obviously, I think it's obvious that we all want clean water, and we all want to protect the Great Bay, and we all want to protect our drinking water. So, we live here, and we're raising families here, and it's important, I think, to all of us. So, so that's one part of the issue, obviously, and yep. Am I whispering?
Is it just one of us or
Yeah.
all of us?
That's just me.
Okay.
Okay.
I'd hate to have to redo that.
Right.
Loud and clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, so I think
Clean water.
Clean water is important to all of us. My concerns about the RBO, though, are separate from that. So I do have concerns about the RBO, and one of those concerns was the specificity. In looking back at some of the things that had passed in other towns, some of those things really make a lot of sense to me, right? Like when you're fighting against USA Springs to come in and steal your groundwater, that it was tangible. I understood that. I don't know that I totally I still don't. I mean, I understand the concept, but I just don't understand how in practice the RBO would work. And so, and I have a lot of concerns about it.
This one in particular?
This one in particular, yeah. And my concerns were obviously the legality of it, and I think that it has the potential to open us up to lawsuits that I don't know that we're prepared as a municipality to deal with. So there's that issue. I am looking at notes, so I apologize. My other thought is that this particular, in this case, the conversation was around chemicals in the water, primarily, and I feel like it's hard. We all know how, water travels, and so the idea that Newmarket can have one set of rules or standards, and, Raymond might have another, or Epping might have another. I find that, beyond the fact that it just doesn't make sense, I find it concerning. And as somebody who has worked in our town government now for, going on 5 years, we've focused so much on regionalization, and that's been a topic of conversation from well before I was even on the council. And so we're constantly trying to include more and more communities, even in sometimes parts of our own community, and rather than being like this little fiefdom, and all these individual ones that have, I see in a lot of ways, cost us financially. When every town has its own fire department, every town, and there's no regionalization that happens. I don't see that as a positive. I've seen like the negative effects of that. And so I really do see that it's the states, beyond a region, or the region, or even the county. It's really the state's responsibility. Ideally, our federal government's responsibility to make sure that our water is clean. So, in my mind, working through DES and EPA, I mean, those are the places where this level of regulation needs to happen.
Are you talking about like the specific individuals, like I guess the right to clean air, clean water, and what determines clean, or are you talking more about the enforcement at the local level of the issues brought forth in the RBO?
The enforcement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess that's one of my major draws against passing the RBO as it's written, which something Gretchen had said. I don't think that it's would be responsible for us to say no to making changes or acknowledging and doing something in and of itself along these lines. But I think it's the way that this RBO is written right now that I cannot, faithfully say, yes, this is the best course of action. And I guess that's where I was also coming from, is I think that you do have a right to go to someone and say, hey, you're aggressing against me. You need to stop this, else I will use the court system and make you stop. But I think it's one thing to do that, but then another to say, well, I have this rights-based ordinance which says I can just determine by using Attorney Radigan's terminology, vague standards to then, initiate a suit against you. And I have the town government saying that I can do this, but we don't have any oversight of that. I don't want this to, it's probably not going to sound right, but it's almost like deputizing for however somebody can read the RBO. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So we have a group of people here who read it in one way, which I think is, a very good way to read it, but what happens if somebody reads it another way, or, wants to pass another RBO?
Well, and that speaks to Councillor Cass' unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes,
That,
and I questioned that during
Right.
the sessions, so I share that concern.
Yeah.
And but that does, I think, more generally come from the specificity aspect. But going back to the concept of an RBO, I'd like to know more about your where you come down on just the concept of it. And I'll just say that maybe I shouldn't say this on record. I hear the argument that change isn't, positive change isn't always through the authorized channels. And being an agent of positive change can sometimes require innovation and kind of, like they say, thinking outside the box. This isn't really thinking outside the box so much as almost challenging your own authority as a counselor, right? Or being part of a council and saying, and I'm intrigued by the idea of that as it relates to, more authority given to locally.
I think that the idea of an RBO, going against what Attorney Radigan said is, not really permissible in the state of New Hampshire, is kind of an appropriate level of civil disobedience at the municipality, level. A way of saying, hey, you know what? You're doing it wrong, and we think that this is the right way to do it.
You said it better than I did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
But it's not where we're coming in and we're saying, hey, we're going to rewrite everything, and we get to. But I think that, there was a very strong argument made that, the New Hampshire state constitution, which should be the highest law on the land here outside from the federal constitution, says that, if government's not doing things the right way, you as a citizen should be able to change that and do change that. And I think that the an RBO or a type of, resolution or ordinance or something like, would be good. I just don't think it's this one. I think that it would be perhaps maybe better if there were more work done and, brought back to the town council with something that's more specific to our town, better defined for how we would look at it and make it somewhat more palatable, But it's something like, section 2A, corporations or governmental entities that willfully violate any provision of the ordinance are required to pay the maximum civil penalty allowed by state law or $1,000 a day of the violation, whichever is greater. Not really sure how, proper having something like that is, and then to also say, well, I as a citizen can just bill you for this because I disagree and I think that you're transgressing against me. Please don't assume that I'm trying to pull the arguments made out of context. It's the way it comes off as someone who's reading this plain language several times now. It's not easy.
As long as this process has been, I still feel like I would like to talk to other towns about how they were more specific or targeted, or what the challenges were to come up with something that they felt they could get behind. How did they what was their process, right? I'm very process oriented, sorry.
Yeah.
That would be helpful, I think, if we felt like we could continue to entertain the idea of an RBO and leave the door open for it. I think that's what I would like to see. It doesn't mean that we, necessarily end up there. It doesn't prescribe that, or even direct. I wouldn't want to direct the council to do it. I think it's more that this has been a learning experience to, kind of challenge thinking, and I'll even add that kind of things that have been going on in our society have shown me that sometimes maybe you need to act more quickly, or find a way to act more quickly. Slow process is good though too, because the rule of law is very important, to maintain, not status quo, but actually protect everybody, right? And keep things safe for everybody. So I don't want to go outside that, but I think when I look at this and I do like a risk assessment on it, and I go, well, how do you usually do a risk assessment? It's usually, what's the likelihood of something negative happening, and if that negative thing did happen, what's the severity of it, right? It's kind of two dimensions to it usually, and there's probably more now. And so for likelihood, I think we could look to other towns. And generally speaking, at towns our size, at the level of RBOs that they've done, I think Pittsburgh is probably another situation. That's a big city, and they had corporations come after them to sue them for their RBO. But that's that's a big pond, right? If we look kind of at the level of government that we're talking about, I think the likelihood has so far been low. I don't think we've heard of anybody who's been sued yet, right? And then you look at the possible outcomes, maybe unintended consequences. That's maybe something that we could solicit from other municipalities and say, well, you've had it in place for a year or 2 years or however long it's been. What kind of unintended things happened, and what was their nature? Just like we do with all our other problems, we kind of look for precedent, right? Mm-hmm. Has somebody else done it before? Sometimes Newmarket's on the bleeding edge, but a lot of other times we ask, well, what's happened elsewhere? How have they done it, right? What was the outcome? So, and what process did they use to get there? So that's what I'm suggesting, probably, to keep the door open to, even if, and then on the other side, maybe talk to the group and, or suggest that they maybe revisit, we could maybe give them some feedback, more detailed feedback. I think Mr. Radigan's letter had a lot of really good specific suggestions in there. I think it was very friendly advice, by the way. I thought his whole, I think that was a friendly negative. So
He
there's a
seemed
lot of
very
positive.
sympathetic to the cause.
I don't know if he was sympathetic, but he
But,
was
I mean-
very helpful in giving
Yes,
really
that's
good
what I mean.
suggestions. Positive feedback on how to adjust it or amend it. So, all right, I'm rambling a bit now. So,
So, what would your what would you suggest as a course of action to move forward?
so I know that our next action item is to, well, tell me, is it still to make a recommendation of some sort,
The intention
of any
was,
sort to the council?
it was my understanding from the creation of the subcommittee at the town council, and then here was to further investigate and recommend whether the town council, or recommend to the town council whether they should seriously investigate and adopt the RBO as is, or if we would recommend against further discussion of this RBO as it stands, but not necessarily discount the possibility of reworking, retweaking, and coming back with something else. But the idea being, should the town council adopt this as it is, yes or no? That's the question.
I think the other piece of it is just, generally speaking, do we feel that just the RBO process, or is that a tool going forward that the town should consider in general, besides just this one? If it's not this one, do you just say, no, RBOs aren't for us, or?
I can only speak for myself, but I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
I think circumstances change all the time, and so I wouldn't blanket, and say absolutely this isn't for us.
Do we add that? Because I thought what I was hearing was that it was pretty
I
much a
think-
straight up up or no, yes or no on this particular.
I think
one.
on this particular
Yeah.
one, that's what we're talking about, but not for the future.
Would we add some commentary around
We can
that?
add a rider, it's my intention that once this process has been finalized, we sum up our discussion and what we believe the next way to go is, and bring that to the town council and say, this is what we discussed, this is what we voted on, this is where we think it should go from here, whether it's, in approving this RBO and et cetera, or declining this RBO and whatever. Do you mind if I ask a question from a couple of the members in our audience for just a couple of examples for other types of RBOs? I know that you'd provided some, I'm just not thinking of them offhand right now.
Right, there was more than just the environmental even, there were some
Yeah.
other examples that were given.
Yeah,
Could you come to the
so-
microphone? Sorry.
it's fine. So in, looks like it is on. In Barnstead, they were the first to adopt a rights-based ordinance in the state of New Hampshire in 2006, and there was no immediate direct threat in their community. So it would be similar to what Newmarket is considering. They did so because of what was happening in Nottingham with USA Springs. And then they did so again in 2016 by adopting basically a freedom from discrimination rights-based ordinance. And so they were the first in the state of New Hampshire to move forward with something outside of the realm of environmental as far as adopting it. That's not to say that other communities haven't considered maybe non-environmental RBOs. There are some communities that have worked with CELDF to draft a free and fair elections RBO. And then for political reasons within their local community, they did not bring it forth to town meeting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
This is helpful.
Okay. How do you think we should go forward then? I mean, do we have a consensus first, I guess? Like, do we have an idea of what we have a consensus about? Do we want to kind of recap that first and see where we're agreeing, where,
Recapping
Like-
and going from there.
I'm hearing that, if we kind of bullet it out, right now, we don't think this RBO, that we can recommend going forward with this RBO. Is that
That's how I feel.
all
that's
three
how-
of us?
I definitely feel
Yeah,
that way.
I feel that way. Zach?
Yes.
Okay. So that's maybe bullet number 1. 2, if the RBO would be redrafted, would we, I mean, if they want to present another RBO, we'd look at it, right? Would we do it, and would we do it through a subcommittee, or just from the town council, or we're not ready to talk about that
Yeah,
yet?
I think we would have to wait and see.
See, okay,
I don't know that we would need to go through this process
right,
over and over again.
Right.
I think that would be like Groundhog Day.
yeah. Yes.
You know, and just
Yes.
unnecessary.
This
I
was
mean,
to process the idea of an RBO, right, and get familiar with what it is, what
I
it means.
think with the way that this RBO was brought to the town council and how it ended up with the town council, this process for this one was incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to perhaps rebrand a subcommittee of the town council to consider future RBOs if they came forward and
No.
like law for discussion about the issue. Because I'm almost wondering if it's going straight to the town council, presenting an issue for the first time, and then maybe the second time, and having everybody decide. I think that we might run into some issues there, and maybe we want to present some feedback, have them go back, and almost like how budget committee is. You bring it to us, we give you feedback. You work back and forth. That's what it's there for, and then we bring it to the voters who are the final. But I'm not saying I necessarily want to sign up for another subcommittee.
No, and I don't think that we can have.
Help me out.
I don't think that we can have subcommittees for every topic or every item that
Agreed.
that the council as a body, or that Steve as the town administrator chooses not to move forward.
Okay.
Like, sometimes you just have to say, okay, no means no.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I think that there is nothing preventing anyone from the community coming to every town council meeting and keeping this issue alive. If that's how I feel town government is supposed to work. We don't have the traditional town meeting where we put things on the ballot. That's just not our form of government here in Newmarket, and so our government is representative, and you elect town council. The community elects town council members to represent their interests. And maybe this becomes an election issue. I don't know. I'm not saying that I want it to be,
Way to
but
open
maybe
that
it
can of
is. I mean,
worms.
if that's how the community, if that's where they see
The needs for the
the
town.
needs for the town, exactly,
Yeah.
then that's what needs to happen. And sometimes that's the way. Sometimes you have to be the squeaky wheel in order to get things done and to affect change. And it can be tiring, and unfortunately, it doesn't happen overnight. I don't know that an RBO is something that I would ever support. I don't know that I wouldn't support it. Like, I don't know what the future holds. I know that this I don't feel comfortable with.
Is it possible to ask you guys a question? Should I come up to the microphone?
It's
Not for this meeting.
Okay,
were you gonna-
so we got that was the first bullet, right?
Yeah.
right.
So, did we have a bullet 2?
I think it was on the issue of if the RBO were to come back redrafted or related.
So that's
Or I guess,
a suggestion we're making?
what do we recommend to them, and what do we recommend to the council regarding future RBOs?
Right, that's a good one.
I don't know that we can make a recommendation to the council for future RBOs.
It's
You know what
not-
I mean? I think that think we take each
Would it be
item as it
a-
comes.
Would it be not a recommendation, but maybe a summary of our,
I guess
having trouble to articulate.
I don't want to say maybe recommendation wasn't the right word, but it felt to me that we kind of shut it down really quickly, which there was a very long presentation. We asked a lot of questions. There were a lot of community events, but I think for some folks it maybe had come off curt because this is just kind of a new process that was brought forward to us that obviously is still in its infancy across New Hampshire. Maybe not recommending, hey, RBOs are the best thing in the world, you should always accept them every time, but maybe that we should perhaps treat them slightly different when they come forward to really, investigate them. I don't know. On the case of this one, we obviously came and we investigated because it was a, really pressing issue. And,
Right.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, I have to say that again. I don't know that we can make any blanket recommendation to the council for the future. Like this. I think
I don't
we're
think
dealing
you're
with
wrong.
what.
No, I don't think
Yeah,
you're wrong.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think
I
that
don't
we're
think you're
dealing
wrong
with what
either.
we have in front of us, and
Yeah.
then
I was-
we'll move on.
I'm trying to figure out what it is we would want to
Yeah.
share with the rest of the council, which is, are we finding the RBO idea intriguing or promising or worth consideration? What are the words that we want to, I'm sensing that from the three of us. And is that what we want to share with, what our result is for the three of us personally, is
Right.
that by going through this process, it was positive. We remain open to the idea of RBOs. And that's what we're sharing with the rest of the council. That if the rest of you had gone through this process, you would likely maybe or maybe not share that, but that's where we ended up as part of it, right? Not recommending one way or the other, just sort of saying this is generally a positive experience. I felt that way.
Yep.
It was a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of thought, but it was worth doing, I think, at least once. So, but I don't know what the next step would be for an RBO to come before the council. So I don't know that answer either.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of my hiccup. We could theoretically receive one Wednesday night on a completely different topic, drafted with completely different language, and what do we do then?
Right.
Nope, sorry, not interested. Or here's a subcommittee. It's like.
Right. And that's, again, one of the, that, what are we, it's December,
Yes.
in just a few months, it'll be a new council,
Yeah.
it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, which is why, again, things are always in flux, so you just never know what's gonna happen.
So I would say, I would agree, we can't really make a recommendation on RBOs per se.
Right.
But I think the value of the work that we've done here is lost if we don't maybe encourage the other counselors to at least maybe, if they can, make some time to virtually go through the process in a miniature by maybe reading the minutes or watching the meetings.
I think
when
that's
if
something I
another
might
RBO comes up.
Especially Larry Doyle's. Right? I just want to make sure I had the name correctly. Larry Doyle's letter, and what he had said before us was about the engagement that we've given to the group. That, I think I'm phrasing it properly, is not always seen from the town council, so maybe some way of saying, hey, we did a really in-depth, personal discussion about this issue over the course of several months that really helped, maybe something along those lines, that more community engagement from our side,
This is the challenge of every subcommittee, right?
Yes.
And other board working with the council, and the council with the other boards. This is like the constant refrain I'm hearing, which is, we do all this work, and we'd like it to go forward somehow and add value to the whole process, but we face these difficulties of, getting that experience over the wall. So that's what I'm struggling with, but it's no different than that I'm seeing on any other separate group.
I mean, the other piece of this, the RBO aside,
Yeah.
I think, is that if any group in our community takes the time to, draft a piece of legislation for us to consider, I think we need to consider it. So, and that was my issue with it being dismissed without a real consideration. I mean, I think it was important. It wasn't completely dismissed. I mean, it got a legal opinion, and the legal opinion said this doesn't work. It's against the law in the state of New Hampshire. So, but I thought it was really important that we gave this group that's worked so hard, residents of our town,
Yes.
a chance to be heard, and to understand their point of view. I thought that was really important. And so, if the issue was, I don't know, a dog walking ordinance, I don't care what the issue is. I think that if it's that important to a number of community members, then there needs to be a way for them to be heard in at our meetings, in our system.
I totally agree. I'm wondering on this one, however, maybe the town council would have some options, not necessarily with this RBO, but maybe incorporating some of the language and the ideals into, our legal framework for the town. Standing by and working with state agencies and federal agencies to, know that we do have clean water, and if we don't, that we will, rectify that. We'll use the means, and so I think they have a great list of, values that I would absolutely stand behind every step of the way. It's just the enforcement, putting that into practice. But I think that, the town would be losing out if we didn't incorporate some of this into, something meaningful.
So I did hear something fairly specific that we could recommend, that you said, which was, we could recommend that the council always consider any legitimate legislation that's been drafted by a group, presenting it to the council. That we always give it at least one once over, right, and not just get it on the agenda to review.
And just to be devil's advocate there, I think Steve's response would probably be, it wasn't legitimate. I ran it by the lawyer, and the lawyer said it wasn't legitimate.
Okay.
So I don't think that, so I don't, and sometimes,
Well, don't he and the chair work out the agenda, generally speaking? So there's some discretion there.
right.
So as long as it's reviewed, maybe, when the agenda's being put together, that's when the decision can be made as to whether it should, is one.
Right. I mean, I
So
don't
it's
disagree
joint.
with you. I'm
So
just,
it's joint, you
Right,
know?
right.
I appreciate the filter,
Right.
but I think what we're trying to get at is, it's, our agenda is our agenda, right?
Right.
Let me
So-
ask this. what is the current process by which we get something onto the agenda, aside from one of us bringing it or Steve bringing it? You know, how, just the regular old, you know, Newmarket citizen who lives over on Main Street says, you know, I want to bring something to the town council. And I think maybe that's kind of what's missing, is they can approach a counselor and say, hey, we should talk about this and you should really bring it forward. I think it's great, but, you know, if there's not a counselor willing to do that, or, you
Right.
know, they come to a meeting and maybe they don't have the best presentation at first, but there's something there to work with, we just, you know, don't help foster it maybe, that it could potentially lose out.
Yeah.
They brought us
That
a
is-
law, they answered every single question we threw at them, no matter how tough it was, and they had counterpoints for everything. Not everybody's gonna be that way, but, you know, how do we as a town council be better, you know? It's one of those things that's been on my mind,
Right.
not wanting to say no to something that has a lot of heart and effort and, you know, real tangible thought behind it.
I think you can let yourself off the hook now, because I think we've got specific,
Yeah.
very specific, with the help of, I think, the town attorney.
Yeah.
You know, he helped us articulate what it was exactly. I think that's good feedback for, like I said earlier, that can, you know, be used constructively to go forward. So it's not just saying no.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the way I'm looking at it. So, well,
I'm wondering too if we can, I know that you talked about putting like together all the information
Yeah.
from these meetings. If we can forward that also to our state reps
Yes.
and state senator to say this is the process that we went through. You know, I don't know if that, what is it?
the amendment,
The amendment
Yeah.
19.
yep,
I don't know if that will be put through again in the current legislature. I'm guessing it probably, you know, something similar will be. So I don't know if we want to recommend that we support that, but you know, at least recommend we went through this process, and you know, we do recommend that you take a look at all of our notes and the information that we went through.
yeah.
Moving forward from our decision, because as we're getting to that point, my intention is to draft a letter just explaining what we did, have in that agendas and minutes for each meeting, adding in the town attorney's letter, which I will say was the only thing that said don't adopt the RPO, like officially from anybody, but then also including the documentation and the arguments put forward, as well as the plain language from the RBO for the town. But that sending out to the state reps and the state senator. What else? Is that proper? Do we think, is that enough? Aside from including our recommendation as well, but
I think that's what we're here to do.
just want to
That's
make
it.
sure it's done right.
Yep.
Okay. So,
I feel comfortable with that.
okay, so. Formal
I
vote?
think so.
Recapping what or should we recap everything that we got?
Sure. If you're asking, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
need a
I guess
recap?
I would like to recap, so when we call and actually vote, we have word for word. Agreeing to not recommend the adoption of this RBO as is. Recommending to the town council that they should more seriously consider legitimate and thorough pieces of legislation sent to them.
I would say instead of more seriously, I
Yeah,
would just say, we recommend they consider, you know,
yeah,
that they, you know, as a rule or as a practice.
as a practice, consider and discuss legitimate pieces of legislation brought forward. And we agreed to include the final document to be sent out to our state reps and senators in support of Amendment 19, and or just explaining the process we went through and recommend further.
I don't think the amendment, since it was not approved, I don't think, does it exist anymore?
I
So
don't
you,
know.
yeah. Are you speaking in general though,
I meant in general.
of a constitutional amendment,
Yeah.
like Amendment 19?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like info on that? As it stands, the amendment? So that, I'm
Sure.
just thinking of your info, so CACR 19 was 2018
Right.
legislation.
Please, thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thanks.
So CACR 19 was 2018
Mhm.
legislation, so it won't have that same bill number. It is being reintroduced. Representative Alan Reed is the prime sponsor on it for 2019.
Okay.
Okay.
It has an LSR number right now, but not an actual bill number. Those have not been released yet.
Thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.
So,
It's good to know.
supporting like legislation such as CACR 19.
Yeah. Now, by support,
I don't know that we can
There's- we
say that we
can't
support
really give
it
support.
unless we
Oh,
vote as a
sorry.
council.
Yeah, you're,
and that's really just a resolution, isn't
Sorry.
it? But that's about all we can do.
But I think as to say this is what our town experienced.
okay.
You know, I think that we can forward it
Okay.
that information and just, you know,
So
as
on the
as information.
on the topic of legislation such as CACR
Right.
19.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Anything else we're missing?
So, you're gonna draft it, do we then need to approve it, or how does that work? Or do we just submit it as the chair writes it?
I was
I mean, I
going
think
to
we can-
draft it.
Yeah.
I was going to send it to the both of you. I was also going to loop Steve on it to make sure that it looked proper.
Mm-hmm.
Anything, basically, at that point, if I missed anything, if I misspelled anything, or maybe I didn't properly summarize what we've discussed tonight, that would be the time. And having the town administrator there just to kind of oversee that, I think, would be proper.
Yeah.
And then I will present it to the town council at our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay.
I'm hoping to have it done for the 19th. And they're, at that point, just asking the town council to accept what we did as a subcommittee. And I'm guessing dissolve us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Shall I
I
begin?
like it. Sure.
All right. So, I would accept a motion to not recommend the adoption of the RBO as presented to us by Answer and CellDef, with the rider that we recommend to the town council that as a practice, as a general practice, consider and discuss legitimate pieces of legislation that have been brought forth by community members, as well as include the final documents from these meetings that will be sent out to the state reps and senators, and show our discussion on legislation such as CACR 19 and forthcoming legislation in the New Hampshire legislature. Do I have a second?
Well, so moved.
Oh, sorry.
Second.
Okay. All in favor or by name?
All in favor. There's only three of
All
us.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right. I'm assuming there's no new business. I put it on there just in case. With that in mind, I'd like to thank you for your time. We've been here for many months, and we've read a lot of stuff. It's been a very interesting learning experience for me, and I would like to just once again thank the two groups who came forward, especially Monica and Michelle, who really, put their heart and their all out for those two meetings. And with that, I'll consider us adjourned at 8 o'clock.